Yes, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to this interview series of Mentor My Board, that is Boardroom Talks. Boardroom is a place where fortunes of great companies are written, and hence, in the pursuit of bringing the best practices, followed by the boardrooms, best practices followed by eminent directors, professionals associated with the boardrooms. We have been conducting this interview series with directors, professionals, and business leaders who have been guiding the boards and acting as torch bearers for the corporate India. And let me now introduce Mentor My Board to you first. Mentor My Board is up and running platform which is fully functional now, and corporate directors where come together to learn, network, and to sharpen their boardroom skills. We are on a mission to transform Indian corporate directors and boardrooms and create a community of 1 lakh directors by 2027. On 18th and 19th December, we have a unique boardroom mastery certification program for promoter directors, executive directors, uh, executive senior management. That's most important, where eminent mentors are going to make them board ready and board informed. So keep watching the space of Mentor My Board on social media. You'll get links for registration. So don't miss out the opportunity. And thank you for viewing, liking, and sharing Boardroom Talk series, and also sharing your valuable suggestions and feedbacks. Kindly do share, like, subscribe to our Facebook page, LinkedIn page, and also our YouTube channel. And most importantly, join our community of directors on Mentor My Board. So today I, CS Divya Momaya, founder of Mentor My Board, invite our esteemed moderator, CS Bharti Iyer, who has rich 30 years of insurance industry experience, and she's been an eminent advisor to Mentor My Board. So today, let's get ready for this boardroom talk with Mr. Satish Sangmeshwaran and Mr. D.A. Arvind from DAA Consulting. And I request Bharti to introduce Satish and Arvind to all of us. So over to you, Bharti. Thank you.
So much, Divya. It is my very great pleasure to invite Arvind and Satish to this Boardroom Talk series. I would like to introduce first D. Arvind, who is the founder and the managing partner of D. Arvind and Associates, which was started in 2010. Arvind is a founding partner in Rosefield DAA International, a supply chain consulting firm, and has industry as well as consulting background experience. This places him in a unique position to see complex issues from a solutions perspective. Arvind is qualified as a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, the Institute of Company Secretaries of India, as well as the Indian Council of Arbitration. He is also having post member qualification in corporate governance from the Institute of Company Secretaries. With regard to work profile, it's very nice achievements which I am now reading out to you. He's been with three of the big four, a senior advisor on indirect taxes and practices for 1 year with PwC, partner and head of indirect tax practice in the South for 2 years with KPMG, and executive director in Mumbai for 4 years with Deloitte. With a work profile industry experience, he has been with Castrol, corporate head of taxes and legal at Mumbai for 6 years, general manager with DCW, and also a manager of plant accounts and excise for 4 years with ACC. Professional contributions also have been as a chairman of Indirect Tax Committee at Bangalore Chamber of Commerce, as executive committee member of Bombay Chambers of Commerce and Tamil Nadu Chamber of Commerce. He has also served as the regional advisory committee member of Central Excise and Customs Department of the Government of India. He is a regular speaker and author of several published professional articles. Arvind has also been appointed as commissioner by TDSAT, that is Telecom Disputes Settlement Appellate Tribunal, to work on assignment basis in connection with settlement of disputes. He has also led the industry delegations to the Ministry of Finance for policy and procedural level changes in fiscal laws, and has been successful on very many occasions. Congratulations and welcome, Arvind.
Thank you, Bharati.
Let
Thank you
me
for a
also
nice
have the pleasure of inviting Satish Sangameshwaran, who is the managing director of DAA Associates. Uh, just 1 second when I pull up the profile. Satish is also an fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He is also fellow member of the Institute of Cost and Management Accountants of India. Just 1 second, please. Member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants and Cost Accountants with experience in industry and consulting, spanning 34 years in the field of indirect taxation coupled with technology and commercial matters. Among various assignments, Satish has worked as a head of indirect tax for L&T Group, handling various issues including global compliance, operations, and commercial matters. He has also been associated with PwC as a senior partner. During his long stint in the industry and in the consulting field, he has advised various corporates on several issues, including SAP implementation, GST and legacy statutes, customs duty, EU tax matters, foreign trade policy, various regulatory matters from taxation and commercial perspective, setting up amalgamation, merger and demerger of business verticals and entities, entity and transaction structuring, representations before various government authorities in tax litigations, before adjudication appellate authorities, including tribunal. He is also a prolific speaker in various august forums and conferences conducted by the industry and trade bodies like Aditya Birla Group, Reliance, NASN, BCCI, MCCI, ASSOCHAM, to name a few. He has also been involved in the designing of the GST network. Now, he is a senior partner in the DAA Consulting, handling assignments pertaining to Indian and MNC companies. Welcome, Satish, also to the Boardroom Talk series.
Thanks, Divya. Thanks, Bharti.
To have this profile. Absolutely wonderful to
have. Yeah, we are honored and privileged to have you both here in this Boardroom Talk series.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure, Bharti. It's our pleasure, Divya. Thank you for this opportunity to interact. It's our pleasure too.
Thank you, Arvind and Satish. So let me first direct the first question to Arvind, because we would like you to elaborate a little bit on your experience as a director on various boards. How did you land up being a director on the board? What were your special skill sets? What were your special achievements which landed you this position? Please elaborate.
Okay. See, in 2009, I was working in KPMG as partner in charge of South Indirect Tax Practice. That is where one of my close friends started a company, which is a closely held public company, having about 3,000 shareholders. And he told me to join his board as whole-time director to take care of finance and legal matters for his company. And that's how I joined the board, quitting KPMG from consulting directly to the board. This opportunity came not just because he was my friend. He saw me as a trustworthy person with integrity and a lot of capabilities to add value to his company. Otherwise, nobody is going to invite somebody to become a whole-time director in a company. After all, he's giving 15% stake. You also give 15% stake in this company as sweat equity. But you'll be surprised that within 1 month, I quit that company from whole-time director position to independent director position.
Independent director.
Yeah, now I am the independent director as well as audit committee chairman of that particular company. Because I realized that that was a pharma company, managing legal and finance matters for a pharma company is that's not my cup of tea. So I said, okay, I will rather become a watchdog. I'd rather become an audit committee chairman than become a whole-time director. And that's how I started my firm DAA at that point in time.
It's a really complicated cup of tea, I understand totally. So what are your experiences with the Big Four with regard to your view and perspective while presenting various audit committee reports to various board members? What is your experience with regard to the company's board members lacking corporate governance experience with regard to strategic planning, risk management, effective implementation of the 3 lines of defense?
Okay, see, though I was a partner in Big Four, I was not an audit partner, I was a tax partner. So my interaction with the boards of the firms of the companies, which was audited by Deloitte or KPMG or PwC, is limited to tax provisioning or contingent liability relating to tax matters And whenever there's a complex issue, I was called to board to explain whether the contingent liability was right or whether provisioning was right. So to that extent, only my interaction with the board was there as a Big Four partner. But what I saw generally is the urge to show good numbers. Okay, generally they gloss it over they gloss over many things. They want to show good numbers, attractive numbers, and therefore, what they didn't really question. If it is a contingent liability, so be it. If it is a provisioning required, they simply accepted, and they never questioned our wisdom of classifying it as a contingent liability or a provisioning. And I could see not great interaction whenever an MD or a CEO or a CFO presented financials to the board. I have not seen independent directors or other directors questioning those numbers. So in many cases, I have seen this, and simply they agree to whatever numbers presented by CEO or CFO. That's my experience with the board as a partner of Big Four.
So here I would like to ask one question exactly connecting to what you said. So as an independent director, if the person is outside perspective, how the person in, probably 1 hour or 2 hour span of a board meeting will be able to interpret that whatever numbers the auditors have presented, there might be something, and how do they actually, start asking those questions? So any, things which you can ponder upon.
No, it's basically, it's not just 1 hour. If an independent director is going and attending a board meeting, he is supposed to prepare himself well in advance so that he becomes relevant and he asks relevant questions in the board meeting. Most important thing is he should understand that particular sector, how that sector is performing, and vis-a-vis the company in which he is a member is performing. So that will give a broad overview whether things are right or wrong. If the industry itself is doing badly, and if this particular company is also doing badly, understandable. But if the industry is doing well, let's say if the industry is doing 80% and this is doing only 40%, then immediately questions should be asked. Relevant questions should be asked, why your poor top line or bottom line. So that is one thing which can come very easily to an independent director, even without a proper preparation. The second thing is you should be prepared. You should ask relevant questions. Particularly, I have seen where the companies really, I would say, not doing well is the valuing investments. I've seen in many companies where investments in non-listed companies generally are valued over and above the actual value of the particular company, particular investments.
They're not on mark to market or held to maturity.
Exactly.
Because I'm coming from insurance industry, and IRDA has got very, very strict guidelines on how we value. Okay. So what is the thumb rule? If the regulator has not specifically said that this is the valuation methodology, what would be your advice with regard to thumb rule for valuation, especially historical blue chips?
No, see, if it is not market price determined, then you will have to have a registered valuer report at least once in a year, rather than just believing whatever is there in the financials or whatever is certified by the statutory auditor. Be it Deloitte or KPMG, doesn't matter.
True. So wonderful. So Satish, what's your view on some of the key aspects for independent directors when the financials gets presented in the boards?
My take is, I'll come from a very different perspective. See, I worked predominantly in companies like Larsen & Toubro and in PwC. And as far as I am concerned, I think my biggest teacher has been Larsen & Toubro.
Wow.
Because the Big Four gives you a few things to work on. And, it's a fairly very well-defined a kind of a border within which you operate. And you can't really go beyond that. Whereas if you work with companies like Larsen & Toubro, first of all, they give you a kind of a job rotation, which could be right across, multiple functions, multiple groups, multiple business verticals, multiple geographies, and multiple functional specialization. And the moment they see that there is potential in you, they give you multiple areas to work on. So I would say in that sense, my biggest teacher in life has been my long stint with Larsen & Toubro. It could be implementation of an SAP system And believe me, those days, maybe about 20 years back or even prior to that, we had not even heard of an ERP. And then we were asked to implement an SAP R3 those days, and there were not too many people who had implemented. So this company again gave me a chance to do that. It again gave us a chance to work on consolidation of accounts, and there are multiple group companies. There are about 120 plus group companies, subsidiary companies and associate companies. So when you start working on the accounting aspects of these companies, that is when you really realize, what are the businesses, what are the challenges in the businesses. And many of these businesses are not product based, they are project based. So naturally the cash flows are very erratic. And that's when you really wonder, as against a product based company, which is more predictable. When you work in a project company, it is more unpredictable, and it is the unpredictability in a business that brings the best in a person. Because every project is different. Some are, funded by the client themselves, of course, but some are funded by some World Bank authority. Some are JICA funded projects. And in every project, there is something very unique. It could be a steel project. It could be a cement project. It could be a telecom project. The projects are so different, and they are all coming up in various parts of the country. For example, L&T at any point of time has about 400, 450 projects across the country, and maybe about 50 outside of India. So it is these project experiences that really teach you a lot of things, like risk management. It is not just numbers.
So
For me,
how you actually, what I understand is that such kind of experience actually helps if you are an independent director or a director on a board. That experience, what you acquire through these kind of, roles, what you have gone through, more robust in terms of understanding the finances when the financials are placed in the boards.
I'll go a step beyond that. In fact, it's not just about understanding numbers. These experiences teach you, one is numbers. Second, are the numbers correct? Are these numbers accurately stated? Are these numbers sustainable? In the sense, what is competition doing? Am I in line with competition? Is this same number, is it sustainable for year 2? Is it sustainable for year 3? What do I need to do differently from a strategy point of view? Are a few things, that we really pick up, from these companies. For example, if I do a project, maybe I do 10 projects right, but if I do one project wrong, this can eat away the margins of all my 10 projects. This is something that we always keep in mind. So our learning, from these organizations sometimes is not bookish. It is absolutely on the job, where possibly none of the books teach you these things in life. You virtually pick up on the job. But such managements are very unique, I would say. L&T in itself is possibly a very unique organization. It's not a multinational, it's an Indian multinational, completely a professional organization. It is not driven by any Indian business groups. So the way we present accounts, we have to be true, we have to be fair, without even an auditor guiding us, we have to be true and fair. So these kind of businesses teach you something beyond books, beyond numbers, in terms of market, in terms of cash flows, in terms of strategy, and in terms of sustainability. So what we really learned is all about risk, strategy, and sustainability, from such kind of companies.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Very nice. Both of y'all have commented that the board should look beyond the numbers and should be up to date. So would you recommend that even if it's a smaller company and the director, for the independent directors, there must be a frequency of MIS dashboards? And what should be the main points which the independent director should call for from executive management and KM in the dashboard? Not a complicated, but what are the main things which you would ideally want to have from the boards?
As an independent director, I would be interested in, first of all, the compliance. Because anything goes wrong, I will be in soup. I don't want to be in soup. So one thing which is very sure is statutory compliance of all the important laws of this country, a dashboard, where they have complied in letter and spirit. The second is the corporate governance, particularly CEO payouts, related party transactions, disclosure, transparency, and things like that are very important to me. So a dashboard on that. Third one is on the actual financials numbers vis-a-vis the budgeted, projected, whatever, so that we know whether they are doing the right track or wrong, right track or not. There is a third dashboard I would like to have. And the fourth one is, of course, the key parameters, particularly if they want to grow or do they want to grow, do they want to diversify, how they want this.
There's a bit of drag over there. Satish, would you just like to elaborate if you have heard what Arvind was saying? Just on the dashboard, because it's a monthly dashboard and a director will be a director on so many companies. So what do you feel like one single page what are the things which he can just on the go, understand?
Yeah, in addition to the points mentioned by Arvind, what I would like to see is, are there certain underlying challenges in the business which is possibly not coming up? Is there a kind of a silent volcano, waiting to erupt? Is there some kind of a claim against the company? Is there some kind of a litigation, with a vendor or with a customer, or something which is likely to come up? So ideally at the board level, I would like to understand problem before it really comes up like a volcano. We should sense a problem coming, say, 50 kilometers, to kind of give a forewarning that, yes, here is a problem. And how do I really kind of mitigate the problem, mitigate the risk? And when I see this kind of a problem, then the board at that level, possibly the employees at certain levels may find it a little difficult to anticipate, because they are day in and day out, busy, flooded with day-to-day operational matters. So it is up to the board, to kind of get a feel of these kind of problems, waiting to erupt, and then kind of try and fix it. It could be from a customer, it could be from a vendor, it could be a claim, or it could be a third party, who's manufacturing for me. Possibly this third party, maybe, I'm dependent on him today. Do I really rely on him, or is his financials okay? Is he likely to go in to some kind of a problem? Do I depend on him, or do I create an alternate vendor for me? Because today in the MNC world, what is happening is there's a lot of third party manufacture. So what I would like to do is, I don't want to depend on a particular third party. I mean, I don't want to depend on a third party, not because, that he's going to fail or something, but tomorrow financially he may fail, or there is another third party who's able to possibly do a better job for me, maybe a better quality, maybe he has advanced machinery, or maybe he can do a cheaper job for me, because I also need to keep a view on the prices, So tomorrow the prices can crash, my output prices can crash. There is a competitor which can slash prices. So if I depend on one particular vendor, that could be pretty dangerous for me. So I create a solution when I don't need to have a solution, for example. So I look for solutions.
Review of the vendor management policy, review of customer complaints and grievances. All this ideally should be a regular feature of the dashboard.
Yes, exactly. Because on one side, the numbers are historical, whereas some of these inputs could be a little futuristic, more from a strategic perspective. So ideally, we should have a mix and match of the historical numbers coupled with, the emerging trend, the markets, new technology coming in, and so on and so forth.
So what should be the ideal, frequency of these dashboards being placed before the boards? Should that be a month-on-month basis? Should that be on quarterly basis when the board meetings are happening usually? So what you think, can be a good best practice, or probably you have experience, best practice.
Monthly.
It should be
best
monthly.
practice would be monthly. Best practice would be monthly, naturally.
Okay.
You
Wonderful.
cannot ask the independent director to just see just before the board meeting.
Right.
So you will have to be constantly updated. So I agree with you.
So that may be the realistic picture. Agreed. Yeah, directors need to be fully informed. Otherwise, they'll have, the no shocks policy. Totally, I go with that. No shocks to the board.
True.
Board should never get nasty surprises.
I may add a point to what Mr. Arvind said. Definitely these MIS reports have to be monthly, but it is up to the board member, to kind of gauge, the correctness or the accuracy of these reports, he should have a kind of a seventh sense, to kind of see whether this is right, or is there something being missed out? Is there something under the carpet? That's where, his value add comes, which comes through experience. He keeps talking to people, maybe to competitors, maybe for emerging technologies, maybe, for various reasons. So that's where, the seventh sense comes up, for the board members, looking beyond, what is there,
In fact, I have heard till now sixth sense. Ki you should have sixth sense, and I'm really interested to know what is this seventh sense, which the board of directors should have. So please, I mean, if you can think of what that is, and how do you develop it?
Yeah, I'll tell you. See, seventh sense is actually, going beyond, what one can comprehend.
Correct.
Because see, ultimately, when people are there at the board level, definitely what comes up at that level is the experience, the sheer experience. So it is the question of identifying, understanding a risk or an opportunity, So both are challenges, One is risk and the other is opportunity. You can't miss out on an opportunity. At
Absolutely.
the same time, you need to have the risk, the impending risk or a potential risk. Since it is a combination of understanding the risk and understanding even opportunities which you can't miss, I just added one more number to it and made it a seventh sense. Normally it is a sixth. So one is understanding risk, and the opportunity which comes your way, possibly if you miss it, it's gone forever. And that's what I meant by the seventh sense.
Perfect. Perfect.
Right time, right place. You must be in the right time and the right place to seize the opportunity. Totally get you. So while coming back to this, I just wanted to come back on that. Review of the risk management policy, and most importantly, the significant accounting policies. You both are chartered accountants, both have experience with either or three of the big fours. What is your take on the board's review of significant accounting policies, the hidden treasures inside that? Why is this just being adopted every year on year? Thoughts, please.
But that's really unfortunate. I completely agree with you, Bharati, that review of significant account policy is generally given a go by most of the boards, and that's a fact. That's a fact. And unfortunately, even the internal auditor, as well as the statutory auditor, is not giving enough importance. And if at all is giving some importance, it's only in letter and not in spirit. So I completely agree with you that in that particular area, things will have to improve in this country. Constant review of significant account policies and making it robust is very, very important.
I can, give it by way of an example. I won't name the company, but let me tell you, it's a very, very renowned company in the pharmaceutical space, a multinational company, decided to put up a plant in Bangalore, mainly to cater to a particular product. Let me not name the product, because the moment I tell you the name of the product, I'm almost telling you the name of the company. They wanted this to be the India hub, for their global supplies of X product. They went ahead with the land acquisition in Bangalore. They went ahead in terms of putting up the plant. At some point, they realized that this has certain ingredient which causes certain side effects. And hence, the global FDA, the US FDA, withdrew this drug from the market. And obviously, the plant was almost a few months from commissioning. And, setting up a pharma plant, is quite time consuming. The kind of regulation that goes into a pharma plant is quite time consuming. It involves time, money, cost, effort, so many things, and this is an organic growth. They were putting it up themselves. At some point, they decided that, if the product is banned, where is the question? Because the plant was developed particularly for a single product. It was not a multi-product as envisaged at that point of time. Now, let me take you to this business situation in terms of an accounting policy which talks about impairment of assets. Now, clearly, when you talk about the accounting standard for impairment of asset, clearly the entire cost that has gone into it, the market research, the trials, so many costs which have gone into it, which would have been capitalized, obviously is up for impairment, because the product is not going to be manufactured and it's not a multi-product, kind of a plant. So
Yes.
the company had to go for a major impairment for this particular organic growth in Bangalore.
Right.
Now, talking of auditors, obviously the auditor has to look at numbers, historical numbers, but at the same time, the auditor has to be aware of the market situation, the global scenario, the kind of ranking that it has got, from US FDA authorities. And naturally, when this kind of a situation comes up, it's not a product recall, a product recall is still manageable. Whereas here we are talking about a plant, which has to go through impairment. This is where a very significant accounting policy on impairment comes up, into practice. It doesn't happen day to day. I'm just possibly taking a very extreme example, but that is where, the auditor has to be aware. The companies have to be aware that yes, suddenly, there is an element of risk, a product which can, kind of, qualify for FDA, and then suddenly everything comes to a standstill, and then one has to get into impairment. So it is going beyond financial statements.
Well beyond the financial statements. Thank you. It is very illustrative. I was actually thinking of things like related party transactions review. Then because the Ind accounting standards is now replacing accounting standards. And you know that definition of related party under Companies Act and under Ind AS 24 is quite different. So do you not want to actually review your significant accounting policies? So also transfer pricing. Even small SMEs have transfer pricing, when they're doing jobbing work or any small work for any multinationals, because a lot of multinationals are outsourcing. Things like GDPR, that also has implications and it has financial implications. So it is up to the independent director to be aware these significant accounting policies have got hidden risks, like how Satish was saying, writing off of patents. Now, you must have got some patent for this Bangalore company, and now that is getting written off. So these are aspects which an independent director has to be aware of when he's sitting on the board. We're talking about special acumen and skills, financial literacy, industry knowledge, experience, people skills, very important, cyber application, etc. What do you feel is most important for any independent director, all directors, as they represent board of different companies across industries, across genres, across various sizes, from private one-person companies also, right up to listed companies?
According to me, most important is financial literacy, ability to read balance sheet and profit and loss account, very important, and general awareness of legal laws applicable to that particular company, so that he is able to at least see whether the company has complied with important laws of the country. Boldness to speak up his mind, most important quality, okay, of an independent director. If he's bold enough to speak up his mind in a board meeting, that's more important, and that's very, very important, and that is one of the important quality according to me. And broad knowledge of the particular sector where his company is, so that he is able to analyze the performance of his company vis-a-vis the sector is also important. And another important thing according to me is ability to keep arm's length within the board members, and ability to identify conflict of interest and then take appropriate actions moment he is able to realize there is a conflict of interest.
Very diplomatic.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should you like to add anything to this?
One thing that I would like to add is the person at the helm of the affairs, he should understand the entire value chain of the business, right from, from the vendor. See, for example, in auto industry, typically, the auto manufacturer is only an assembler at the end of the day. There are people who makes parts, components, accessories. There are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 vendors. So he should understand the entire value chain, more on the input side, that is the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Because even if there is something that goes wrong, either of the vendors, who are tier 1, 2, or 3, if it can result in a kind of a product recall at the end. Because on the output side, the value chain is fairly small. I mean, there is a manufacturer, there is a dealer, that's it. Unlike an FMCG, there is a distributor, there is a stockist, etc. Here, it is only one dealer. So it is the input side, which is very significant in a auto industry, for example. He should understand every component, every assembly, every sub-assembly to such an extent that any of this, all of them are of course critical, but all of that can result in a product recall. And if that happens, I think the image of the company can go for a toss. I mean, at that time, one cannot say that, no, I'm not responsible. It is my tier 1 vendor who went wrong. If I were to talk about again the same auto example, there is a company, an MNC company. I'll take the name of the company. Say, for example, Bosch. Bosch is into safety systems. And what they develop is Indian technology in terms of development of an airbag, for example. I'm just taking airbag as an example because this requires a complete understanding of the safety system. And obviously, it should work when it has to work. It cannot fail. And an airbag cannot open up, when it is not required. So it has to work, maybe in terms of a probability of 1 on a lakh kind of a situation, but at that time it has to work. So the top management will have to keep their eyes and ears open, to such kind of enablers, who are say a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 vendor, to ensure that, there is continuous supply of products with the same level of quality that you expect, a final automobile, to go to a customer. So understanding the value chain is quite critical, as far as the board members are concerned.
But I mean, if I just exactly take this example, being an outside, person, probably when we talk of independent, but you're absolutely right. When we talk of promoter directors, they have to make sure all these things are intact. But when we talk of the independent director or the external perspective, who may not be well versed with that industry, then in such situation, what are the important skill sets that the person can bring to the table or to bring to the board?
What he can bring to the board is a complete market understanding, I would say. See, sometimes, the promoters, I mean, it again depends on what kind of a promoter he is. He could be a person from, say, a couple of generations, they've been running the business. So they may be good operationally. So where the promoter driven organizations, have certain capabilities, the independent people will have to bring on those added capabilities in terms of understanding markets, understanding independent, technologies, which are emerging. Those kind of added skills is what I would expect, rather than playing very conventional roles in terms of, attending board meetings and looking at books, etc. I would say the promoter boards sometimes, lack in terms of risk assessment. So these are add-on areas whereby the independent directors can really chip in with their knowledge. In fact, if that is not there, in fact, they have to develop and build these skills. I mean, that's when, they are really independent in terms of their views and their contributions to the business, to bring in the added element of, what can go wrong in a business.
In fact, exactly what you said, I can just correlate, because when we talk of the unlisted space, private limited companies, they're not required to have independent directors. So taking from, the point what you said, I think, such companies who are growing, who have wonderful product line, who have, scalability, or promoters are aspiring to scale, they must have a board of advisors for them who act and bring them the outside perspective to that board, which is a promoter driven board, but they are not listed and they don't have to abide by the laws of the SEBI regulations to have the independent directors a very well point. Do you think that can really add a lot of value to SMEs and MSMEs when we talk of, having them a different perspective? Yeah. So do you think this can really work, or this probably, needs to happen somewhere to bring more professionalism in the boards? And because private limited, practically board even don't exist, in the smaller companies. So will that be kind of, it's a question that will that, or can that be a good perspective to bring on?
No, certainly. See, in one of the company where I am an independent director, they are not required to have an independent director.
Oh,
it's
wow.
a closely held public company.
Okay.
But they appointed me as independent director as well as audit committee chairman, basically to bring certain perspective to the table. The most important perspective is risk management, not risk management from the legal compliance alone, but also from the business, whether this particular product will survive, whether the technology will survive, whether the customers will be there with them for a long time. So all this evaluation is done by us as an audit committee chairman. So the independent director role is not restricted to, as he rightly said, looking at financial statements or legal compliance alone, but bringing certain expertise which the company is currently lacking.
Absolutely, that's wonderful.
I've seen, I will recommend also that companies which are aiming to get listed at some point in time, though they are private limited or closely held companies now, should certainly have independent director if they have plans to get listed at some point in time.
Wonderful. Yeah.
If I can add it, in terms of a practical example, what an independent director can bring in terms of his expertise is, a classic example could be that of a company called Metalbox, which existed many years back. Some of us may not even remember. There was a company called Metalbox. They were absolute experts in packaging, metal packaging, as it was those days. We didn't have too much of glass, and we didn't have too much of PET. We didn't have Tetra. We didn't have blister packing, and so on and so forth. But this company was an expert. There should have been a vision at that point of time to see that the concept of packaging is going to undergo significant changes in terms of emerging technologies, emerging materials like a PET. For certain items, it could be glass, liquor, etc. For certain items, like in pharma, it could be a blister. It could be a Tetra Pak for certain cold drinks, etc. They never anticipated this, and today the company has become history. See, for a market leader at that point of time to go out of business, there should have been an anticipation of the evolving technologies. They didn't do that. They just remained where they are, happy with what they are, happy with their product. And that's when they failed. Today it is history. So that's where,
actually, a classic example is also Kodak. And there's some WhatsApp chat going around with regard to Kodak and some other companies also.
Even BlackBerry.
BlackBerry. What about, in this thing also, we are talking about Nokia. Now Nokia has made a revival with television sets. Yeah, so that anticipation, looking around the corner, is very important for independent directors to bring that vision. You have to bring that vision to the to the board. Can we just go to the next question? I just wanted to ask you, like your experience, Arvind, with industry chambers of commerce and policy advisories. There are a number of rollbacks right now from the government, and a lot of care packages been announced by the government. As a number of our viewers are startups, promoter businesses, and MSMEs. So we would like you to just tell us, like, what are the new opportunities which you anticipate from your experience on chambers of commerce very quickly, and what the directors, especially independent directors, should keep an eye and ear open for, and promoters.
No, all of us are aware of the fiscal benefits this government has offered to MSMEs, and also the reduction in interest, then the interest circumvention subsidies. All this, everybody is aware. If you go to the MSME website, it's very clearly given. I don't think there is any problem there. Apart from that moratorium given by RBI on the loan, all of us are aware. In fact, many of the MSMEs whom I know, they have taken advantage of all these schemes. Okay. What we can expect is particularly the anti-Chinese sentiment is there in many countries now, because we are interacting with many customers and vendors in many countries. There's an anti-Chinese sentiment, and
Yes.
many companies are looking at other markets to develop their supply chain. In that context, India is also one of them, though I won't say India is rated very high as an alternative to China, but India is a very serious player, and government is working towards maximizing various benefits and incentives, and each and every state government is having their own policies, particularly UP, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra. So if a business and if an entrepreneur is located in any one of these states, it is essential for him to understand the benefits that are offered by that particular state apart from central government. Central government, at least it is centrally available, data is available, easily accessible. But states, many states, you will have to go through, you'll have to interact with their industry ministry and then understand what benefits they get and then pass it on to the MSMEs.
That will be a great value addition of the independent
Absolutely.
director.
Absolutely.
Then coming
I
back.
want to add a couple of points to what Mr. Arvind said.
Yeah.
MSMEs today have the benefit of something called an interest subvention, which is to the extent of 2% on their entire, their borrowings, lendings kind of a thing. This has been announced about a couple of months back, possibly as part of the COVID package by the government. Of course, we have to see to what extent these guidelines from RBI has got translated in terms of actionable things, at the banking level, the industry level. But if this is a 2% reduction in the interest, this is a substantial benefit that the MSME should know, should understand, should approach the right people, and then try to see that how do I really bring this RBI notification into my P&L, so that should be the effort at that senior level, rather than leaving it to somebody. I mean, whether it is done by the promoter director or an independent director or somebody, but one should be aware, so the point I'm making is the awareness at the organization level, aware of what's happening, aware of the concession, aware of the benefits. This is one. Another benefit could be the government has recently rolled out certain production linked incentives to various sectors. It could be mobile accessory, electronic devices,
Yes.
food processing, API manufacture in the healthcare industry, and various other sectors. Almost about 10 sectors they have announced this benefit. So they should really track this and see that these benefits really get translated. That's one way to kind of improve, the production manufacturing capabilities in India, as Arvind was saying, as compared to China. Minimize the dependence on imports, be it China or any other country, because ultimately when you save foreign currency, you add value to the company, to the country. So when the government is announcing some of these benefits towards an Atmanirbhar Bharat, we should be aware of these things and see to what extent I can translate this, in terms of a benefit for my company.
Correct.
This has to be a top-down approach.
So just one question, which, when we're talking of the government schemes and benefits, recently we all know there has been a lot of hue and cry over the agricultural reforms which are happening. So do you think, or have you studied some of the, key impacts which can have overall in terms of the industries like sugar industry, or some very, very, kind of agro industry? So do you think there are positive impacts which are going to happen with these reforms, or the negative impacts are more? Have you studied on it? I'm not sure, but have you, given a thought, or have you studied the agro industry basically? So just a while.
Not really from my side, Divya.
Okay.
Satish?
Yeah, if I can share my perspective on the agro-based industry, food processing, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's a very wide kind of an industry. I won't say it's a completely an organized industry, but it is becoming more and more organized. See, when you develop some of these products, fruit juices, pulps, and so on and so forth, first of all, companies look at a complete value chain mapping, right from source, till the export. And this business has huge exports potential. the existing players, have a benefit called an MEIS benefit, where X percentage of the export FOB value of export is available by way of a scheme called an MEIS scheme, which is Merchandise Exports India scheme. This is under the current foreign trade policy of 15 to 20.
Oh,
Of course, the scheme is undergoing a change. The MEIS is going to become something called an RODTEP, which is a remission scheme. Whatever be the type of the scheme, of course, the change is happening mainly because to that extent we are not WTO compliant. But the business should be aware that there is a benefit like this. And in addition to that, there is something called a duty drawback. So if the companies are aware of these kind of benefits, they should really try and see to what extent they can maximize, the revenues. Even today, I find these policies are there, and the benefits which are actually availed by companies, I think
much
is
less,
really
much
is
less.
much less. It
Much
is falling
less.
short of. So there is a policy, but it is not getting implemented.
True.
So these are a few things that a company, at the highest level should ensure that we really bring the maximum efficiency, because ultimately we are talking of competing with China. And when we are really want to competing, with China,
With
then
the
we
world.
got to put in all these levels of efficiency to ensure that, these get translated into my P&L.
Correct. Absolutely. Point well taken.
Because growth, everybody talks about top line growth and bottom line, but even saving on costs, minimizing costs,
Very important.
finding
Very important.
Hidden, yeah, those are hidden costs. There are a lot of hidden costs.
like windfall of tax, these rollbacks. Why don't you take advantage? It is like ghar ki dal or ghar ki murgi dal barat.
barabar.
So like that, that basically means that because it's not very well known or valued, it is we're not just overlooking it totally. We're just totally overlooking it. So I just want to bring you to the focus of Mentor My Board. Your views on Mentor My Board, 5 tips which you feel is very important that Mentor My Board should focus on. How do you feel, is it important that directors and boards, especially family-run businesses, startup, be coachable? Do you recognize that they are finding that they require to be coachable, especially now in the COVID times? All these views, I would just like you both to elaborate.
No, no person in the world is equipped with everything, whether it is marketing, product, technology, finance. So somebody needs to be coached if he has to make a meaningful contribution to the board. He will have to be coached. And what sort of coaching he would require is based on his current skill sets. Let's say if he's an expert in tax and legal, then he will require skill sets in the same in the sense product knowledge, market knowledge, technology development, and things, and so on and so forth. So every person, to my mind, is coachable and would need coaching. No person in the world can say that he knows everything. So in that sense,
but my experience says, when I talk to directors, we know everything. That concept is so strong, with the directors. We don't need, right? We are the business leaders and we have achieved a lot, and we really don't need to. I mean, if we say something, then they say, okay, we have our consultants who are going to take care of it. So what's the need of us to have, that knowledge? It's okay. So what's your thought on that?
No, I'll give you an example. Though I am a fellow member of a company secretary institute, I was not knowing, to be frank with you, that a company cannot issue share allotment more than 50. Now it's 200. Okay, more than 50 shareholders at any given point in time, at one time.
Yeah. So here today also the rule is same.
The rule is same. It's now 200. Previously it was 50.
No. Total 200 shareholders for a private limited, but at one moment you can allot only to 50.
No. I'm talking about a closely held public limited company.
Okay.
At one moment, you can allot for 200 people.
Yeah.
Previously, it was 50 people.
Right. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I was not knowing this. And one of the company in which I was a director, even today I'm a director there, they allotted in excess of 200. That is 500, 540, 600 on several occasions. several occasions, 3,000 doctors, 3,000 shareholders. So when I came to know about it, I questioned the company secretary. Company secretary said, no, this is compoundable, no problem at all. We can compound this. We have not done anything great. No violation. I said, okay. Then this fellow went and applied for compounding based on my instruction. Get this compounded. Fellow applied for compounding. ROC, instead of entertaining the compounding application, he immediately wrote a letter to CB. He examined this complete allotments and then take up the matter. Suddenly, we received a show cause notice from CB. When we applied before ROC, we didn't get any communication from ROC. We got from CB saying that you are violated so and so, and therefore you will have to refund whatever money you have collected from the shareholders in respect of this irregular allotment, and then refund with interest. This happened after 4 years of allotment. After 4 years of allotment, 15% interest is what you need to pay. That's what the company, CB told this company. Suddenly we realized, we did research. Then we came to know that Sahara is in trouble for one of this. This is one of the reasons for which Sahara is in trouble. Sahara chairman is in jail. So there is no way out. You will have to refund. If they have to refund this money, then the company will collapse. It will be detrimental to the shareholders. True. So we went and approached CB and said, if I refund this money, which is now invested in plant, machinery, stock, inventory, lab, R&D, etc., then the company will collapse. The shareholders will get hardly anything. No, the CB did not bother. They said, you'll have to refund. Absolutely. You don't care. You're violated. So the matter went to, they levied huge penalty on the company along with direction to refund the money with interest. So the matter went to Security Appellate Tribunal. SAT. They also said the same thing, that you bloody refund the money. Then we told SAT that even if I give a refund check, none of my shareholders will accept the refund because they want the company to flourish. Yeah. They have strong belief in this company. So none of them will accept. They said, prove this. Then we went and convened shareholders meeting. We explained everything to the shareholders. 89% of the shareholders wanted to stay invested.
Wow.
Only 11% of the shareholders wanted to take back the money. Wow. We went back and told the SAT that this is the position. So they will not be willing to, even if I give a check, they will not deposit the check in the bank.
Correct.
So correct. It will be an entire exercise. So give a resolution. Then they gave a resolution saying, okay, only for the people who are interested in taking back the refund, you give the refund. The balance you can retain, provided all the 89% of the shareholders accept such retention. And that's how it was resolved. It was resolved.
I think rightly said that, the awareness amongst the professionals, the directors about the law. Even if we say there are 3,000 laws in India, how a person or a director is going to make sure that you're complying with everything, you need to have a system.
As a company secretary, I should have known this.
True.
I was not aware.
It's not a question of knowing it. It is retrieving the knowledge at the correct time. Why we depend upon the experts also from outside, and we go to a consultant who does it. That is also important.
But one message is very clear. That particular company enjoyed the goodwill and trust of shareholders, which is very, very important from a promoter as well as for the directors. And therefore, the company is still surviving without any problem. In fact, it is growing well. It's doing pretty well now.
Super.
Congratulations. What a nice end to a lovely story,
Wow.
It's a compliance nightmare,
Absolutely.
Compounding and having some other regulator jump into the fray. Really. So what are the 5 tips which you would like to share to MMB, Mentor My Board?
Sorry?
What are the 5 tips you would like to share with Mentor My Board, both of you all, on what we should concentrate on with regard to mentoring our boards as well as mentoring directors?
See, as far as I'm concerned, mentoring the board would need to advise on the right composition of the board Composition doesn't mean male versus female. It's about age, it's about qualification, it's about the overall industry knowledge, the product knowledge, everything. So how many numbers, how many of them should be chartered accountants, and how many of them should be engineers, how many of them should be marketing professionals. So I'm talking about composition. So Mentor My Board can do that advisory to the startups. Second one is the performance evaluation of the board of directors in terms of their contribution to the board in the board meetings as well as to the company. Okay, that is second thing. So performance evaluation is what you can do, and the third one is the complete legal compliance of the company in terms of related party transaction, CEO payout, the composition, then the complete legal compliance of all the laws of this country, etc. You can be a reviewer. My Mentor My Board can be a reviewer.
Thank
And also, you can be a recommending body. If somebody wanted to have independent director for their company, Mentor My Board can identify, create a data bank, and then identify which person can be most suitable for which company, and then you can start recommending. So that's another thing which you could do probably.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Satish.
Of course, Mr. Arvind has covered all the points, so there's hardly anything for me, but I would just like to add a couple of points. The boards, should always look for, doing things right the legal way. I'll go a step ahead and say it should not be just legal, it should be legal and it should be ethical also. So one should always attempt, to create a kind of an infrastructure within the organization in terms of its people down below, not just at the board level, but right down below, to try and see, of course, we have to do things legally. It should be even satisfying the test of being ethical. So that's one incremental take from my side. But I think, yes, these are some of the
in fact thank you so much for bringing out this point of ethical aspects. And let me tell you, in the forthcoming boardroom mastery program what we are conducting on 18th and 19th of December, we have a topic for our participants who are mostly going to be the promoter directors, executive directors, is about management integrity. When you have high integrity at top level, the everything comes down properly. The moment, there is a Chinese proverb which says the fish rots at its head, and that's where if the greed or if, some, kind of aspects are coming at the top level of the company, the management, the top directors, the, organization trembles. So absolutely well point taken, thank you so much. And Bharti, for you to closing remarks, because we have already, crossed 7.
Shooting the time.
Yeah.
So,
but the interactions were so wonderful that, time ka pata hi nahi chala, 1 ghanta kab khatam ho gaya. So
yes,
over to you, Bharti.
Yeah, thank you both, Arvind, Satish. It has really been illuminating in the extreme. You have surpassed my own expectations. Thank you both so much. We would want to eventually welcome you as mentors on Mentor My Board. Divya would be doing whatever is necessary because she's been very eager that we should have experts in the field,
Yes,
to be
absolutely.
mentoring. So yes, so we'll look forward to doing that. And probably we would like to repeat this on some other forum also with both of you. So thank you so much for a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to, yes, thank you, Satish. Thank you, Arvind, for great interactions. And most importantly, thank you to our eminent audience who joins us every Friday on this Boardroom Talk series. Please do like, comment, and share. And most importantly, don't forget to switch on the notification tab and press the bell icon to keep getting notifications whenever we go live. And share with your business associates, friends, so that more and more directors, aspiring directors, are benefited from such great insights from the eminent directors and professionals on this platform. So thank you, everyone. Stay tuned and keep watching and keep sharing and keep motivating us. So thank you. And
thank you.